If you've ever wanted to take a journey into the Middle Ages, the Castle Road Tour, which began in 1954, is definitely the thing to do. One of the amazing things about some of the places that we're going to see on this trip is the fact that it's old Germany, Eastern Germany, some of the Germany that people didn't see before the wall came down, and of course Prague, which was Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic and Slovakia. I'm standing here this morning in Heidelberg, Germany. One thing about Heidelberg is that it's been written about in songs, poems, you've seen it in films. Heidelberg is a very romantic little city, and it's right on the Neckar. There's many things to see and do here. This morning we're going to be beginning our journey on the Castle Road Tour from Heidelberg to Prague. So I'm standing here on the bridge in Heidelberg. This is a beautiful old bridge, that the one that Goethe was speaking of in 1797. Off to my right is the castle here in Heidelberg that is very popular. Okay, I'm standing here in front of a palace. It's actually just like the palace in Versailles. And right here behind me is the first means of love letters back when this castle was very popular with the young ones. You would send a letter up from the top there, and it would float down, and the women would be at the other end actually waiting for the letter. And so that was the first, as our guide said, SMS. I'm standing here in the courtyard of the Heidelberg University jail. We're about to go up into the jail, and if you went to Heidelberg University back in the early 1900s, if you weren't jailed, you weren't actually considered a student here. And when you were jailed, you had to stay here for 3 days and only have bread and water. And then basically, your friends would come and get you at the end of the 3 days, take you out, get you drunk, and as our guide said, you'd probably end up in jail again. But it was a rite of passage, basically, to be a person who was jailed, a student who was jailed here at Heidelberg University. I'm standing here this morning in Nuremberg, Germany, a lovely little town that was actually destroyed during World War II. We've just walked through the King's Gate, and we're about to go into the Old Town. Now, one thing about Nuremberg, Germany is that it was completely destroyed, like I mentioned, but they also had the Nuremberg trials here, and it was the site of the Nazi rallies. I'm standing here in one of the many areas in the old town in Nuremberg where people gather, and as you can see behind me, there's a lovely little fruit market, and there's also flowers. Since it's April right now, flowers and outdoor is very important here in Germany. Another important thing about Nuremberg is that it was actually the site of the first train station here in Germany, which made it a very important location. Rothenburg is the epitome of a small medieval German town. Now, one thing about Rothenburg is that there's a wonderful Christmas market here, so people come all year long to see it. There's another really great little place that we just had lunch at. You won't find any chain hotels here in Rothenburg, so definitely when you come here, although people usually just come here to stay for the day, it's a wonderful place to come and spend the night and enjoy not only the Christmas market, but the wonderful medieval village here. I'm standing here in Hotel Ivanhout, which is a very old hotel. It means Iron Hat. It's the largest hotel in Rothenburg. It has 86 rooms, and it's also one of the oldest hotels here in Rothenburg as well. Rothenburg has become very famous for what we see back here in the window. It's their Christmas market, and they have it all year long. There's a gentleman by the name of Wolfhart, and he happens to be one of the most famous Christmas makers. He makes the nutcrackers and all different kinds of Christmas things, and they sell them here. So actually, Rothenburg is probably the most popular Christmas market town in the world. Pretty amazing that you can see right back here behind me Rothenburg, and this is the wall. It's been here for quite some time, and down in the valley here, the houses are still quite inexpensive. So this is a very beautiful spot when you come to Rothenburg to visit. I'm standing here in the little town of Hirschhorn, and behind me is a castle and a palace. The castle it began being built in the 1200s by the Knights of Hirschhorn, and behind me over here where the steeple is actually a palace which was finished in 1586, and that palace is more of a Renaissance style. So together you have sort of a combination of buildings that started to be built in the 1500s, basically finished being built in the 1600s. There's also walls that fortified the castle, and there's towers on each side, as you can see. And below me here, down at the foot of the castle and the palace, is also the river of Neckar. I'm standing here in front of the town wall in the town of Eberbach, and as you can see, this is a very old wall. It was built back in the medieval period. Over here to my left is the tower. There's a bell and a clock, and that particular tower was where they kept the gunpowder. am standing here in the little town of Bad Vempen, and as you can see behind me are the gates where people used to have to knock if they had come after the gates were closed at night to see if they could get in. This is a very old little town, and up to my left is the castle and some of the buildings that were actually built in the 12th century. Now, one thing about this town now is that there's some amazing spas here, so it kind of brings the old in with the new. There actually was things found here that date back to about 5,000 years ago, when people were still living like nomads here in this part of Europe. So anyway, let's go inside and see what we can find. One of the things that you'll see once you're inside of the old city gates is there's the half-timbered houses and medieval fortifications, which gives this town a very ancient feel. Even though it is afternoon here on a Sunday, the streets are pretty empty. It's a very pleasant place to come, this part of the Castle Road. You can also get here by train, which is right down the hill. Some of the other little towns are harder to get to, but if you're just going along the train tracks, there are many little towns that you can visit. The woman over here to my right actually was born in the 10th century in 1143. As our guide just pointed out, she's in very good condition. She would be what you would call a very wealthy woman during that time period, married to one of the barons living in the castles here. I'm standing here this morning in front of Heinsheim Castle. This is where we spent the night last night. This castle was built in the 1700s, and actually it was in 1810 that Karl Freiherr added the grounds and the vineyards. There's also a romantic little wedding chapel here, and it's a beautiful place to stop and spend the night. There's a nice restaurant and also a pool if you come here during the summertime. I'm standing here this morning at the Gutenberg Castle, and we were just speaking with Baron Gamingen, who is the current owner of the castle. His family has actually been living in this castle for the last 550 years. Right now we're standing in the kitchen, which is now turned into a museum. And one of the really amazing things about this castle is they have so much history and archives, so they can look back and see what was happening 100, 300, 500 years ago. Now, the Baron was telling us they're going to be building a hotel down in the village, and it's going to be a hotel where basically you can have a room and you can sleep on hay, so it'll be very authentic to the time back when the knights were living in this area of Germany. There's a couple of things up here on this floor in the castle that's pretty amazing. First of all, they have 3,900 books here that date back as far as the 15th century. Another thing about this castle is the Baron was telling us it's a very liberal Protestant castle. To my left here is an altar, and the story goes that there's a couple of times that this altar has been stolen. However, it's very protected. The first time it was stolen was hundreds of years ago, and it was apparently thrown into a river. However, the next morning when the people woke up, the altar was actually back where it belonged in the church. Now, not too long ago, about 30 years ago, the Baron was telling us a story about his father, who was asked by the local authorities to make sure and take care of this because there was a band of robbers that were going around and stealing things from churches. Well, apparently the robbers did happen to get this, but the altar found its way back. The gentleman that woke up at about 3 a.m. in the morning saw the thieves trying to steal this and contacted the authorities. So after that, the family decided to move this altar into the castle instead of in the chapel down below. I'm standing here in the castle Chippewa. This castle is 1,000 years old. Behind me here in the chapel is an altar from 1492. As you see, we're looking around, taking a look at the castle. It's very cold inside. Weddings are performed here, and it's just a very amazing old place. Here we are in the torture chamber in the castle. This is the oldest part of the castle right now, and like I said earlier, this castle is 1,000 years old. Let's take a look over here. There's a contraption called the Iron Maiden, which is actually where the band Iron Maiden got their name. And basically, they would shut the door. There would be knives inside, and then they would shut the door around your body, and the knives would cut into your body. Also, in the other room, a little bit further in, there's a rack. And maybe you've never seen a rack before. It looks pretty eerie. So this is definitely your typical castle, unchanged for hundreds of years. One thing that's really kind of interesting is this castle was never attacked, and one of the reasons was because you couldn't see it. When you were coming up from the stream down below, it was hidden from view. So it's interesting how preserved something can be when it's hidden, but it's also a little bit torn down, worn down. Movies have been shot here, however, and there's a lot of things going on here, so it's a great place to stop by when you come and visit the Czech Republic. I'm standing here in Prague this morning, and I'm in front of the St. Vitus. It's a cathedral here that was actually began being built in the 14th century. Next to this cathedral is a palace, and it's actually the largest occupied palace in Europe. I'm standing in front of a mosaic that was completed in the 14th century by a Venetian master. It signifies the Last Judgment. Now, it was very destroyed, and in 1997, the Getty Museum in Los Angeles decided they were going to restore it. So what they did was they brought the money in, and they restored this amazing mosaic. I'm standing here actually in the courtyard outside of this gorgeous cathedral in Prague, and one thing that I want to mention is that right now I'm standing on, underneath me, what is Roman ruins. Now, you can't go down there right now because they're still looking at it and they don't want to destroy it, but this was actually where the Romans, they found Roman artifacts, and then below that there was even something older from the 11th century. It's really amazing here because this church, as you can see, there's pyramids, which are actually just the roofs of the chapels that are inside the church. But it's also, there's a lot of symbols here that you can see date back to the paganism, to the time before Christianity. We're standing here on the Charles Bridge right now, and this is definitely Prague's version of Florence's Ponte Vecchio in Italy. There's all kinds of things for sale, and there's all kinds of people entertaining the masses here on the bridge. It's a Friday afternoon, and we're on the top of the Aria Hotel. It's the first music hotel in Prague, and basically on the different floors they have different music playing in the background you might be able to hear other than the bells chiming some of the music. But they have floors that just play classical, floors that play the Beatles, and it's a boutique hotel. So when you come here, it might be a good idea to stay here one night and enjoy the experience of the music and also this amazing view from the rooftop. This castle has 25 rooms, and our guide just told us that the last time that someone actually lived here in this castle was in 1945 after World War II. It was the last of the Metternich family that lived here, and then it became occupied. So now as we go through the castle, we see some of the old artifacts and realize some of the things that they had here as treasures that were not seen for many years during the communist regime here in the Czech Republic. As we're walking through the castle, we're seeing some really amazing rooms. This room is especially worth mentioning because the panels over here to my right were actually from the 15th century, and they're basically about the finding of the cross. There's also this amazing tapestry here on the wall. It's from France, and up on the right-hand corner it says, "Those who hunt will be hunted themselves," which I thought was a really unique saying. One thing our guide just told us that was quite interesting was that this castle was actually opened as a museum as early as 1828. The first person who ever was the curator here was this gentleman on the wall, back here to my left, and he was the executioner, the last executioner in this area before he became the museum curator back in the early 1800s. Right now we're in the castle library, and there's some really amazing things in this castle. Hanging on the wall of the library is an old Roman shoe, and it's totally torn apart, but it's a piece of leather. Also, they have a lock of Napoleon's hair, and inside this room to my right there is a lock of Beethoven's hair and also Marie Antoinette's Bible. In the little anteroom there's also a couple of Egyptian sarcophaguses that are pretty amazing, and it's just a really interesting place to come and visit. As you can see, this room is pretty amazing in this wonderful display. Not only is Beethoven's hair in here, but there's also all kinds of memorabilia, glasses, Bibles, shoes. It's worth it to come here and see the amazing memorabilia. I'm standing here right now next to one of the Three Musketeers' desks. He actually doodled on this desk. I believe they said the Musketeer's name was Alexander Dumas, and it's also something that you'll see when you come here to the castle. Right now I'm standing here in what I'm going to call the Egyptian room, and the sarcophaguses to my left, the bigger one is 3,500 years old, and the one next to it, the smaller one, is 2,500 years old. Also in here there's crocodile mummies, different amulets that were found in the tombs in Egypt. So this is a really amazing room, and you can really feel the energy of the history here. Well, here we are. We finally made it to the old royal palace here in Prague, and this palace actually was built in the 14th century. Let's go inside and see what we find. I'm standing here at the old royal palace, and parts of it were actually began being built in the 10th century up until the 18th century, I believe. And in the hall behind me is where they've had inaugurations, and they also held coronations. From one of these windows in the 1600s, several men were dropped, and they actually survived. And so this palace has a lot of history, good and bad, and it's just amazing the way that it was just constructed throughout the centuries.